Hi everyone. Today I am joined by my partner Michelle and my daughter Ella Rose. We want to talk about what's happening today, which is Pluto is stationing retrograde in Capricorn. So whenever a planet begins to move either retrograde or direct, that archetype is experiencing a significant turning point. There's a shift happening within consciousness. So I always feel that the retrograde and direct days for any planet are really significant. There's a movement of energy. In this case, it's Pluto. So I want to start by just really creating a foundation for what does it mean when Pluto is moving retrograde? What's that archetype all about? When we look at Pluto, we have to understand that there's a teaching in life that everything is impermanent. Everything and everyone, if it's a thing and a one, will come and go. And thus, from the perspective of our own life journey, our own evolutionary growth, everything that arises and falls away is relevant for a time and then is not relevant if it's not there anymore. So the key is to really learn how to work with what arises in our own life, to be in conscious relationship, to learn and to grow and to evolve from everything. Because otherwise we give value to the things, and then when they go, or when we lose them, or when there's death or sickness or betrayal or whatever, it can feel like we're losing a part of ourselves. But this evolutionary journey for all souls is an ongoing realization of our own eternal wholeness, who we are inside. And so when we engage these life experiences from that point of view of bringing it more into our internal sphere, letting everything inform us of who we are, then we can glean maximal benefit. And of course, this is easier said than done. Pluto really corresponds to a psychology that's predominantly unconscious. So we all have these hooks and these ways of attaching our security to that which is outside of ourselves. And for long periods of time or lifetimes, we can create these dependencies and resist really doing the work of growing and learning about ourselves from it. And so there's this flow for all things Pluto, that we need to be able to engage in relationship, connect with life, connect with the wholeness of experience, and commit to it, and to see it through, to be able to really have the experiences that and that's in a way what this whole incarnation is about. We commit to this life journey. And when it's time for it to go, it goes. And the question really remains, what are we still holding on to? And so there's a teaching in Pluto that really reflects back onto, in this moment, psychologically, what's here? What am I carrying with me? What are my fixations, my deepest fears, my unprocessed attachments, my deep security fears? Because these are the energies that keep us psychologically hooked on the 10,000 aspects and possibilities of creation, people, places, and things, and permeations of all of those that take us away from our own wholeness, our own power. And whenever we work with Pluto, it really does ultimately invite this possibility of arriving at a deep center of unchanging security. Very few souls reach that in an abiding way, but we all on our journey, maybe as we grow, grasp deeper glimpses and moments of understanding what that really means, understanding the true meaning of agency and sovereignty, and that each soul is inherently whole within itself. But that's a big part of doing the Pluto work, really becoming aware of what is in our field in this present moment, and being able to slow down and unravel that, become aware of, oh, well, here's where I'm really invested in this external object of fixation, focus, and worry. And to be able to bring that inside, to become psychologically self-aware, where am I holding on to a notion of security out there? And the key with Pluto is to not really leave any kind of unresolved karma. Because it's not about, well, I'm gonna leave the world behind now and just not have any attachments, because there can be a death wish with, very strong Scorpionic or Plutonian type people might have a death wish because it's like wanting to escape from the the suffering and the attachments and the hardness and the pain of this world. But that itself isn't an actual useful strategy in growing and evolving through this life experience. So we develop with Pluto in general gradually a more concentrated ability to be centered in the midst of change, to be whole and unmoving within as life does its thing, because it's change and circumstance and unfolding of so many inner pieces. And we learn to kind of embracing that Taurus polarity. Taurus is the opposite of Scorpio, so it sort of reflects a teaching that Scorpio can actually draw upon. Pluto rules Scorpio, so it's this Venusian Taurian quality of stability, getting your feet on the earth, being grounded. So that's like a general introduction to Pluto. And do you want to add anything to that? Anything that comes to you?
Yeah, I was thinking about how the past tends to filter the lens through which we see the world. So if you've walked the same trail, 100 times, then the mind is actually projecting out what it might look like. So thus, like, our lifetimes of experience kind of come in, and the lens through which we see others can become just clogged with the past projections of how we've been met by them. And there's a way that you actually lose track of the present moment, because the experience that you're having is just the reflection of the past moment that's been before. And it can become really triggering then when someone or our experience of something, or even destabilizing, no longer matches that past image that we've been holding of that particular person, place, or thing. And so there's a way that this whole Pluto transit is showing us, all the things that are changing, that are the force of change that's coming from like deep inside. But the more we cling to past images of the way things have been, until that instant where all of a sudden you recognize that that building you've driven by 100 times no longer is empty. It's occupied by something else. It's painted a fresh color. You didn't see it before. The process it was undergoing can be so invisible. And then all of a sudden in that moment you realize, oh, this has changed, and now I'm able to see it as it is in the present moment. Or a person, is undergoing deep internal changes, and you're expecting them to react to you or be in relationship with you in the way that they've been in the past, and how destabilizing it is when they actually are who they are in that moment and you're meeting them for the first time. We have to come back to ourselves in order to orient actually to what's happening right now. And that's what came up for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That really reminds me of a teaching that I draw upon frequently for Pluto from Lao Tzu, which is, caught in desire, we only see the manifestations. Free of desire, we see the source. And it's as simple as that. So beautiful and so simple. When we're attached to fill in the blank, outcome, how another person will be relative to us, understanding another person, getting something from another, how we're going to perform, any attachment to life really takes us out of the true nature of this moment. It takes us out of reality. And the whole archetype of perception, the word perception corresponds to Pluto. And perception is not an objective thing by any means. Perception is born from desire. What we perceive reflects back upon the constructs in our own consciousness. And so free of desire, we can see the source, because the isness, what it actually is, becomes available to us on its own. So when Pluto moves retrograde, as per any movement of a planet going retrograde, it's, this has been over the past couple weeks where Pluto's been slowing down and kind of getting to this total halt. Now today it's like total standstill from a geocentric perspective. And as that's happening, it's like these deeper Pluto lessons, which is about shadow, looking at ourselves, taking responsibility for our own psychology, bringing our energy towards the internal space, becoming psychologically self-aware. It's deep shadow work. There's been a lot of stuff going on with Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter. There's a lot of Pluto activity right now. We all know about it. If you don't, you do now. And so as it goes into this retrograde period, there's almost like this insight and this awareness that we've been coming into, that we've been learning about. And the retrograde now is like this turning point that says, okay, integrate it, bring this into your life as we enter into this new phase where you will not be able to predict or understand or know the nuances and the subtle ways in which life will be bringing you out to stand more in your fullness, more in your power. Often the Pluto retrograde archetype can bring about this experience of doubt, of moving further into darkness, moving further into uncertainty, where maybe the things we've learned or figured out or knew don't seem practical, don't seem applicable. We don't know how to actually bring this into the present moment. The archetype of insight is also Pluto, right? We're seeing into. It relates to perception. And so the retrograde archetype actually asks us to go deeper, to look more deeply inside into, in particular, Capricorn Pluto. How can we take responsibility for how we are holding ourselves energetically in the present moment? This really asks us to clean up and to choose a greater spiritual maturity, to take it upon ourselves to do the work that we know otherwise life will enforce for us. You could also think of Pluto as like Pluto going retrograde as like cleaning out a pot or doing an enema. That's a better example. You know, it moves forward and then it's going back in and it's gonna go out again. It's like you put water in a pot to clean out the pot. So it's like going back over the degrees it already went through. And during this time, I think in July maybe, do you know, Jupiter will cross over Pluto again. And then I think in September, October, Jupiter will cross, or October, November, Jupiter will cross with Pluto for the third time. So really this whole year, there's this Jupiter-Pluto dance, and Jupiter's really bringing a lot of insight, a lot of growth, a lot of clarity. But be careful, because Jupiter corresponds to the archetype of exaggeration. And so we can exaggerate through the perceptions that we're creating a reality of loss, abandonment, betrayal, sickness, death, separation, because it feels intense. And so Jupiter is sort of like a double-sided sword, or whatever the term would be here. There's greater potential during this retrograde period, where in a couple months Jupiter will join again, to become very worked up and very invested in blown up perceptions and fears and projections, but also immense possibility for insight. It really all rides upon our choice, our orientation to take responsibility for ourselves. That's the thing that I always say about Pluto, and this is something I've learned from Jeffrey Wolf Green that I just deeply appreciate. At the core, Pluto corresponds to one of two choices: to cooperate or resist with evolution. And what's implied in that is that evolution is an impersonal force that wants to happen. It has nothing to do with our preferences, with our ego constructs, our attachments. It's just the timing of life. Caterpillar has to end at some point. And do we resist or cooperate with that? On my own life journey, more and more I'm finding that everything is sort of fixed. Our destinies are sort of already done. But this only choice we have seems to be whether to accept it or cooperate with it. And I have a couple analogies to offer and a little thought, but I'm going to see if you have anything else to share about this.
I think what comes to mind with Pluto is this magnetic quality. Like Plutonian energy are those things that you're just drawn to without any kind of conscious understanding of why. Like a magnet just pulls together with the other magnet, and vice versa. When a magnet is flipped, it repels. The same way our shadow work can come up, and it's like we're either drawn to someone because they're reflecting back to us something that we can deeply work, or we're triggered by them because that particular, it's like oh, that's not me. I'm disgusted by that. But actually, upon deeper reflection, you can see this place inside that is like, oh, actually, yeah, I do that. And that's why I was so moved into anger or repulsion or, and so the ability during this time for self-reflection on those magnetic qualities, on the things that are showing up in our life that are like really eliciting that strong draw or strong repulsion, because they offer such a window for healing and for growth. And I think there's no soul on this planet that isn't moving towards, like what you're saying, isn't moving towards evolution. But when we resist it, it's incredibly painful.
Mm.
You know, it's like being burnt from the inside.
It is, indeed. This thing that I'm learning in my own life that I want to share is bringing more mindfulness into just the energy of debt. Pluto is debt. And on the most basic level, debt is basically energy that's unresolved that you carry with you into the present moment. And so it's like this psychological linkage to the past, and we can manifest that in a very practical or tangible way in our physical three-dimensional experiences with unresolved karmic debt with people or actual money or whatever. But the idea of debt, as I've been really meditating and kind of feeling into that energy in my own life, can be as simple as starting my next project, sitting down to do my writing when my room is a mess. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. This is not a judgment. But there's something there. And I don't know how to articulate it 100% accurately, because I'm aware that there is not, in my words, this idea that you have to clean your room before doing something. But when I feel into the energy of the moment, there's a little bit of a loss of energy because there's something that's unresolved right over there. And everything reflects everything else. And so for me to be aware of, I'm here endeavoring to write, to, prepare a class, to do my work. But I have these unresolved energetics over there in my room.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like this psychological putting off. I'll do that later. I'll take care of that some other time. And that pattern can build up and build up and build up in so many aspects of our life. I'll buy food on my credit card, getting something that I need with money that I don't have. Again, that could be very useful if used consciously for a time, but that itself will just literally be creating debt where we're acquiring and forming relationships with aspects of life simultaneous to leaving unresolved energetics in our trail. And to reflect on how we relate to one another, to move into different levels or expressions of intimacy, while there are these maybe unresolved emotional needs or desires or expectations, attachments to outcome that are unconsciously being carried into the present moment. When we're holding on to something and we're not forming a relationship with that thing, and then we go and we move into a relationship with something or someone, we're unconsciously bringing this unresolved psychology into the present moment. And it's just something that I'm drawn to become really mindful of. I've been finding a lot of empowerment, and that's a good word here. And just reminding myself that I value emptiness, that I deeply value being 100% where I am, and that mindset is a cultivation. It's a path that I'm learning. It's like a practice that I'm cultivating on my own journey. And to do the dishes so that when I'm done with kitchen, I'm done with kitchen, doesn't mean I can't leave things for later. But I feel in my own system when there's a sense of things in my life are messy. I have allergies, and allergies have just come up. And allergies, I think, are a great example where the body is having a reaction to the environment. And it's sort of fighting with itself. And so I'm very drawn to investigate that. Because I so desire to just be outside and enjoy the air and the sun and the greens and all the smells. But there's this really powerful inflammation that occurs for me, and this has been happening for years. And so the idea of cleansing and elimination and seeing what needs to be released physically, but also everything's emotional too. What deeper emotional processes are here that I'm working through psychologically? We really can't ever separate our internal psychology from the physical realities that manifest for us, but it doesn't always happen easily that we can come across that awareness. So it's just an investigation for me that I feel is really rich, really fertile, bringing more mindfulness into, am I free in this moment as a sovereign being, making conscious choices, or am I taking something with me? And I really admire, I've always admired just people, and it's not even like monks, just I see this in all kinds of people from all walks of life, where there's a certain simplicity, there's a certain settledness. You can feel it. They do something and it's done. It doesn't carry over into the next moment. And there's a feeling of freedom. My liver relaxes when psychologically I feel like I'm here now. There's something that opens up when our minds are actually at rest with ourselves. So I think this is a great area of reflection for us during this Pluto retrograde, and the possibility to gain more insight and perspective into ways that we can clarify and simplify our unrealized or unmet expectations, agendas, unresolved areas of neglect. So we can start to create the habit, and Capricorn is discipline, of bringing ourselves here fully now. And this is a practice. Anything that you would like to add?
I think it's interesting that you bring up debt, because debt is literally trading the now for something out in the future, or trying to obtain something now with resource out in the future. And at some point, you kind of cross the threshold where there isn't ever enough time in the future that you could trade for what you've accumulated in the now. And thus you never get to be here, be with anything. And it's how people end up having to, file for bankruptcy, because the amount of time exchanged in the future exceeds any ability to come with resource in the present moment. You would have to, let's say, charge $1,000 an hour in order to be able to trade what's been created as a need from the future. And it's an entrapment. People, like millions of people, become so indebted that they're entrapped inside of a reality that actually, because of things they needed in the now, and it's not to make debt bad or wrong, but it's just a noticing of how when we attach ourselves to the past or to the future in any significant way, there's a way in which we give up living our own lives, give up freedom and choice, and become stuck to something that actually doesn't exist. Like the interest that you are being charged actually doesn't exist. All of these are creations that a capitalistic, economy depends on you being enslaved. And the more people can become free and actually just live so simply. Like, I made a decision when I was in a lot of debt to do whatever it took to get back to living simply, which included almost a year of not buying things and just receiving whatever I could get as a gift or free from others. And I think there's a lot of healing that can happen for us if we are free to actually be ourselves in the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Reminds me also of another quote from Lao Tzu, which is, what is recent is easy to undo. And I just think of the analogy of like today I made a turmeric drink in my blender, and it was great. But I let it sit in my blender, and I noticed a few hours later when I went to clean it how hard it was to clean my blender. And it just reminds me of that. The more we leave things unresolved, there's definitely a metaphor in it because it's beyond just physical gunk in a container. Things harden, right? Things stick. And it almost requires more concentration, more effort, more attention, energy to actually like soften it. That's a Capricorn piece too. Everything gets crystallized in time. Like the more you let anything be a thing, the more thing-like it will become. That's just like a Capricorn concept. Everything gets crystallized and grows. Like there's nothing that remains static as a thing. And so by not participating and engaging with how we're choosing to mold and construct our physical time-space reality, there's a momentum that's created where things will just kind of get stuck and hardened and fixated and gunky in their condition if we don't really engage and address it. We can definitely think about that in relationships and all kinds of things.